Welcome back to Chapter 5 of Man and Technics by Oswald Spengler. I changed some more things around. I still wasn't happy with the last recording, so let's see how this one goes. Chapter 5, The Last Act, Rise and End of the Machine Culture. 10. The culture of the armed hand had a long wind and got a grip on the whole genus man. The cultures of speech and enterprise, we are at once in the plural, and several can be distinguished, in which personality and mass begin to be in spiritual opposition, in which the spirit becomes avid of power and lays violent hands on life. These cultures embraced, even at their full, only part of mankind, and they are today, after a few millennia, all extinguished and replaced. What we call nature peoples and primitives are merely the remains of their living material, the ruins of forms that once were permeated with soul, cinders out of which the glow of becoming and departing has gone. On this soil, from 3000 BC onwards, there now grew up, here and there, the high cultures. Cultures in the narrowest and grandest sense, each filling but a very small portion of the earth's space, and each enduring for hardly 1,000 years. The tempo is that of the final catastrophes. Every decade has significance, every year almost its special look. It is world history in the most genuine and most exacting sense. This group of passionate life courses, invented for its symbol and its world, the city, in contrast to the village of the previous stage. The stone city, in which is housed a quite artificial living, that has become divorced from Mother Earth and is completely anti-natural. The city of rootless thought that draws the streams of life from the land and uses them up into itself. There arises society, with its hierarchies of class, noble, priest, and Bürger, which is German for citizen, as an artificial gradation of life against the background of mere peasantry. For the natural divisions of those of strong and weak, clever and stupid, and as the seat of the cultural evolution that is wholly intellectualized. There luxury and wealth reign. These are concepts which those who do not share them enviously misunderstand. For what is luxury but culture in its most exacting form? Consider the Athens of Pericles, the Baghdad of Harun al-Rashid, the Rocco. This urban culture is luxury through and through, in all grades and callings, artificial from top to bottom, an affair of arts, whether arts of diplomacy or living, of adornment or writing or thought. Without an economic wealth that is concentrated in a few hands, there can be no wealth of art, of thought, of elegance, not to speak of the luxury of possessing a world outlook, of thinking theoretically instead of practically. Economic impoverishment at once brings spiritual and artistic impoverishment in its train. And in this sense, the technical processes that mature in these cultures are also spiritual luxuries, late, sweet, and fragile fruits of an increasing artificiality and intellectuality. They begin with the building of the tomb pyramids of Egypt and the Sumerian temple towers of Babylonia, which come into being in the 3rd millennium BC, deep in the south, but signify no more than the victory over big masses. Then come the enterprises of Chinese, Indian, classical, Arabian, Mexican cultures. And now, for the 2nd millennium of our era, In the full north, there's our own Faustian culture, which represents the victory of pure technical thought over big problems. For these cultures grow up, though independently of one another, yet in a series, of which in sense is from south to north. I will repeat that. For these cultures grow up, though independently of one another, yet in a series, of which the sense is from south to north. The Faustian West European culture is probably not the last, but certainly it is the most powerful, the most passionate, and, owing to the inward conflict between its comprehensive intellectuality and its profound spiritual disharmony, the most tragic of them all. It is possible that some belated straggler may follow it. For instance, a culture may rise somewhere in the plains between the Vistula and the Amur during the next millennium. But it is here, in our own, that the struggle between nature and the man whose historic destiny has made him pit himself against her is to all intents and purposes ended. The northern countryside, by the severity of the conditions of life in it, the cold, the continuous privation, has forged hard races, with intellects sharpened to the keenest, and the cold fires of an unrestrained passion for fighting, risking, thrusting forward, that which elsewhere I have called the passion of the third dimension. There are, once more, beasts of prey, whose inner forces struggle fruitlessly to break the superiority of thought, of organized artificial living, over the blood, to turn these into their servants, to elevate the destiny of the free personality to being the very meaning of the world. A will to power which laughs at all bounds of time and space, which indeed regards the boundless and endless as its specific target, subjects whole continents to itself, eventually embraces the world in a network of its forms of communication and intercourse, and transforms it by the force of its practical energy and the gigantic power of its technical processes. At the beginning of every high culture, the two primary orders, nobility and priesthood, the beginnings of society, take shape clear of the peasant life of the open land. They are the embodiment of ideas, and moreover mutually exclusive ideas. The noble warrior adventurer lives in a world of facts. The priest, scholar, philosopher in his world of truths. The one is or suffers a destiny, the other thinks in causality. The one would make intellect the servant of a strong living, the other would subject his living to the service of the intellect. And nowhere has this opposition taken more irreconcilable forms than in the Faustian culture, in which the pure blood of the beasts of prey revolts for the last time against the tyranny of pure thought. From the conflict between the ideas of empire and papacy in the 12th and 13th centuries, to the conflict between the forces of a thoroughbred tradition, kingship, nobility, army, and the theories of a plebeian rationalism, liberalism, socialism, from the French to the German Revolution. History is one sequence of efforts to get the decision. Now, I have a feeling that my reading is not very fluent. These sentences are very, they don't flow very well. I don't know how to express that, but I don't know. I'm just going to continue, but if you have the feeling, please let me know in the comments, or if you have any criticism whatsoever, please let me know, because I have a feeling that I myself try to understand the sentence, so sometimes the intonation might be a bit off, because I haven't yet grasped where the sentence is going. And then in the end, yes, I got it all, but it might sound very weird listening to it. I'm kind of afraid that might be the case. Anyways, let's continue. 11. This difference appears in all its magnitude, in the contrast between the Vikings of the blood and the Vikings of the mind, during the rise of the Faustian culture. The first, thrusting insatiably out from the high north into the infinite, reached Spain in 796, Inner Russia in 859, Iceland in 861. In 861 too, Morocco was reached, and thence they ranged to Provence and the environs of Rome itself. In 865 by Kiev, the drive passed on to the Black Sea and Constantinople. In 880 to the Caspian, in 909 to Persia. They settled in Normandy and Iceland about 900, in Greenland about 980, and discovered North America about 1000. In 1029 from Normandy, they are in Lower Italy and Sicily. In 1034 from Constantinople, they are in Greece and Asia Minor. And in 1066 from Normandy again they conquer England. With a like boldness and a like hunger for power and booty, in this case intellectual, northern monks in the 13th and 14th centuries forced their way deep into the world of technical physical problems. Here there was nothing of the idle and impractical curiosity of the Chinese, Indian, classical and Arabian savants, no mere teleological speculation, no contemplative search for a picture of that which man cannot know. True, every scientific theory is a myth of the understanding about nature's forces, and everyone is dependent, through and through, upon the religion with which it belongs. But in the Faustian, and the Faustian alone, every theory is also from the outset a working hypothesis. A working hypothesis need not be correct. It is only required to be practical. It aims not at embracing and unveiling the secrets of the world, but at making them serviceable to definite ends. Hence the advance in mathematical methods, due to the Englishman Grosseteste? I don't know, I'm sorry. Born 1175, and Roger Bacon, born circa 1210, and the German Albertus Magnus, born 1193, and Whittelow, born 1220. Hence, to experiment. I'm sorry. Hence, there's 3 periods right there. Wait, is it a period? I don't even know the word. Period. Wow, I'm sorry. Coma? No, that's German. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Let's move on. Hence, to experiment, Bacon's Scientia Experimentalis, which is the interrogation of nature under torture with the rack, lever, and screw. Experimentum enim solum certificat, as Albertus Magnus put it. It is the stratagem of intellectual beasts of prey. They imagined that their desire was to know God, and yet it was the forces of inorganic nature, the invisible energy manifested in all that happens, that they strove to isolate, to seize, and to turn to account. The Faustian science, and it alone, is dynamics, in contrast to the statics of the Greeks and the alchemy of the Arabs. It is concerned not with stuffs but with forces, Mass itself is a function of energy. Grosseteste developed a theory of space as a function of light. Petrus Peregrinus, a theory of magnetism. The Copernican theory of the Earth's motion round the sun was foreshadowed in a manuscript of 1322 and formulated more clearly and more profoundly than by Copernicus himself, by Oresme, who also anticipated the Galilean law of falling bodies and the Cartesian coordinate geometry. God was looked upon no longer as the Lord who rules the world from his throne, but as an infinite force, already imagined as almost impersonal, that is omnipresent in the world. It was a singular form of divine worship. This experimental investigation of secret forces by pious monks. As an old German mystic said, "In my serving of God, God serves thee." Man evidently was tired of merely having plants and animals and slaves to serve him, and robbing nature's treasures of metal and stone, wood and yarn, of managing her water in canals and wells, of breaking her resistances with ships and roads, bridges and tunnels and dams. Now he meant not merely to plunder her of her materials, but to enslave and harness her very forces, so as to multiply his own strength. This monstrous and unparalleled idea is as old as the Faustian culture itself. Already in the 10th century, we meet with technical constructions of a wholly new sort. Already the steam engine, the steamship, and the air machine are in the thoughts of Roger Bacon and Albertus Magnus. And many a monk busied himself in his cell with the idea of perpetual motion. This last idea never thereafter This last idea never thereafter let go its hold on us, for success would mean the final victory over God or nature. Deus sive natura, a small world of one's own creation, moving like a great world, in virtue of its own forces and obeying the hand of man alone. To build a world oneself, to be oneself God, that is the Faustian inventor's dream, and from it has sprung all our designing and redesigning of machines, to approximate as nearly as possible to the unattainable limit of perpetual motion. The booty idea of the beast of prey is thought out to its logical end. Not this or that bit of the world, as when Prometheus stole fire, but the world itself, complete with its secret of force, is dragged away as spoil to be built into our culture. But he who was not himself possessed by this will to power over all nature would necessarily feel all this as devilish. And in fact, men have always regarded machines as the invention of the devil. With Roger Bacon begins the long life of scientists who suffer as magicians and heretics. But the history of West European techniques marched on. By 1500, a new Vikingism begun by Vasco da Gama and Columbus is underway. New realms are created or conquered in the East and West Indies, and a stream of Nordic blood is poured out into America, where of old the Icelandic seamen had set foot in vain. At the same time, the Viking voyages of the intellect continued on a grand scale. Gunpowder and printing were discovered. From Copernicus and from Galileo on, technical processes followed one another thick and fast, all with the same object of extracting the inorganic forces from the world around and making them, instead of man and animals, do the work. With the growth of the towns, Technics became bourgeois. The successor of these Gothic monks was the cultured lay inventor, the expert priest of the machine. Finally, with the coming of rationalism, the belief in technics almost becomes a materialistic religion. Technics is eternal and immortal like God the Father. It delivers mankind like God the Son, and it illumines us like God the Holy Ghost. And its worshipper is the progress Philistine of the modern age, which runs from La Métrie to Lenin. I gotta take a sip. In reality, the passion of the inventor has nothing whatever to do with its consequences. It is his personal life motif, his personal joy and sorrow. He wants to enjoy his triumph over difficult problems and the wealth and fame that it brings him, for their own sake. I will read that again. I mess up very easy words. I don't quite know why. I hope that goes away with more and more practice. It is his personal life motif, his personal joy and sorrow. He wants to enjoy his triumph over difficult problems and the wealth and fame that it brings him, for their own sake. Whether his discovery is useful or menacing, creative or disturbative, he cares not a jot. Nor indeed is anyone in a position to know this in advance. The effect of a technical achievement of mankind is never foreseen, and incidentally, mankind has never discovered anything whatever. Chemical discoveries like that of synthetic indigo and, what we shall presently witness, that of artificial rubber, upset the living conditions of whole centuries. The electrical transmission of power and the discovery of the possibilities of energy from water have depreciated the old coal areas of Europe and their populations. Have such considerations ever caused an inventor to suppress his discovery? Anyone who imagines this knows little of the beast of prey nature of man. All great discoveries and inventions spring from the delight of strong men in victory. They are expressions of personality and not the utilitarian thinking of the masses, who are merely spectators of the event, but must take its consequences, whatever they may be. And these consequences are immense. The small band of born leaders, the undertakers, and the inventors force nature to perform work that is measured in millions and thousands of millions of horsepower. And in face of this, the quantum of man's physical prowess is so small as not to count. We understand the secrets of nature as little as ever, but we do know the working hypotheses, not true, but merely appropriate, which enables us to force her to obey the command that man expresses by the lightest touch on a switch or a lever. The pace of discovery grows fantastic, and withal, it must be repeated, human labor is not saved thereby. The number of necessary hands grows with the number of machines, since technical luxury surpasses every other sort of luxury, and our artificial life becomes more and more artificial. Since the discovery of the machine, the subtlest of all possible weapons against nature, entrepreneurs and inventors have in principle devoted the number of hands that they needed to its production, the working of the machine being done by inorganic force, steam or gas pressure, electricity, heat, liberated from coal, petroleum, and water. But this difference has dangerously accentuated the spiritual tensions between leaders and led. The two no longer understand each other. The earliest enterprises in the pre-Christian millennia required the intelligent cooperation of all concerned, who had to know and feel what it was all about. There was, therefore, a sort of camaraderie in it, rather like that which we have today in sport. But even by the time of the great constructions of Babylonia and Egypt, this cannot have been the case any longer. The individual laborers comprehended neither the object nor the purpose of the enterprise as a whole, to which they were indifferent and perhaps hostile. Work was a curse, as in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden. And now, since the 18th century, innumerable hands work at things of which the real role in life, even as affecting themselves, is entirely unknown to them, and in the creation of which, therefore, they have inwardly no share. A spiritual barrenness sets in and spreads, a chilling uniformity without height and depth, and bitterness awakes against the life saved? Okay, I'm sorry. Against the life to the gifted ones, the born creators. Men will no longer see nor understand that leaders' work is the barder's work, and that their own life depends on its success. They merely sense that this work is making its doers happy, tuning and enriching the soul, and that is why they hate them. There's really a lot of great stuff in here. Great meaning in a food for thought sense, and I really feel like I don't really convey it that well. Yeah, I'll probably redo the book at some point in the future. I'll probably have to. I can't imagine that this is really enjoyable to read or to listen to. In any case, let's move on. 12. In reality, however, it is out of the power either of heads or of hands to alter in any way the destiny of machine technics. For this has developed out of inward spiritual necessities and is now correspondingly maturing towards its fulfillment and end. Today we stand on the summit, at the point when the fifth act is beginning. The last decisions are taking place. The tragedy is closing. Every high culture is tragedy. The history of mankind as a whole is tragic, but the sacrilege and the catastrophe of the Faustian are greater than all others, greater than anything Aeschylus or Shakespeare ever imagined. The creature is rising up against its creator, as once the microcosm, man against nature, so now the microcosm, machine, is revolting against Nordic man. The lord of the world is becoming the slave of the machine, which is forcing us all, whether we are aware of it or not, to follow its course. The victor, crashed, is dragged to death by the team. At the commencement of the 20th century, the aspect of the world on this small planet is somewhat of this sort. A group of nations of Nordic blood, under the leadership of British, Germans, French, and Americans, commands the situation. Their political power depends on their wealth, and their wealth consists in their industrial strength. But this in turn is bound up with the existence of coal. The Germanic peoples in particular are secured by what is almost a monopoly of the known coal fields, and this has led them to a multiplication of their population that is without parallel in all history. On the ridges of the coal and at the focal points of the lines of communications radiating therefrom is collected a human mass of monstrous size, bred by machine techniques, working for it and living on it. To the other peoples, whether in the form of colonies or of nominally independent states, is assigned the role of which providing the raw material is receiving the products. This division of function is secured by armies and navies, the upkeep of which presupposes industrial wealth, and which have been fashioned by so thorough a technique that they, too, by the pressing of a button, once again the deep relationship, almost identity of politics, war, and economics discloses itself. I didn't get anything of what I just read, so let's do that again. This division of function is secured by armies and navies, the upkeep of which presupposes industrial wealth, and which have been fashioned by so thorough a technique that they too work by the pressing of a button. Once again, the deep relationship, almost identity of politics, war, and economics discloses itself. The degree of military power is independent of the intensity of industry. Countries industrially poor are poor all around. They therefore cannot support an army or wage a war. Therefore they are politically impotent, and therefore the workers in them, leaders and led alike, are pawns of the economic policy of their opponents. In comparison with the masses of executive hands, who are the only part of the picture that a discontent will look upon, the increasing value of the leadership work of the few creative hands, undertakers, organizers, discoverers, engineers, is no longer comprehended and valued, insofar as it is so at all. Practical America rates it highest, and Germany, the land of poets and thinkers, lowest. The imbecile phrase, "The wheels would all be standing still, did thy mighty arm so will," beclouds the minds of chatterers and scribblers. That even a sheep could bring about if it were to fall into the machinery. No, that even a sheep could bring about if it were to fall into the machinery. But to invent these wheels and set them working so as to provide that strong arm with a living, that is something which only a few born thereto can achieve. These uncomprehended and hated leaders, the pack of the strong personalities, have a different psychology from this. They have not lost the old triumph feeling of the beasts of prey, as it holds the quivering victim in its claws, the feeling of Columbus when he saw land on the horizon, the feeling of Moltke at Sedan, as he watched the circle of his batteries completing itself down by Ely and sealing the victory. Such moments, such peaks of human experience, the shipbuilder too enjoys when a huge liner slides down the ways, and the inventor when his machine is run up and found to go splendidly, or when his first zeppelin leaves the ground. But it is of the tragedy of the time that this unfettered human thought can no longer grasp its own consequences. Technics has become as esoteric as the higher mathematics which it uses, while physical theory has refined its intellectual abstractions from phenomena to such a pitch that, without clearly perceiving the fact, it has reached the pure foundations of human knowing. The mechanization of the world has entered a phase of highly dangerous overtension. The picture of the earth with its plants, animals, and man has altered. In a few decades, most of the great forests have gone, to be turned into newsprint, and climatic changes have been thereby set afoot, which imperil the land economy of whole populations. Innumerable animal species have been extinguished, or nearly so, like the bison. Whole races of humanity have been brought almost to a vanishing point, like the North American Indian and the Australian. All things organic are dying in the grip of organization. An artificial world is permeating and poisoning the natural. The civilization itself has become a machine that does, or tries to do, everything in mechanical fashion. We think only in horsepower now. We cannot look at a waterfall without mentally turning it into electric power. We cannot survey a countryside full of pasturing cattle without thinking of its exploitation as a source of meat supply. We cannot look at the beautiful old handwork of an unspoiled primitive people without wishing to replace it by a modern technical process. Our technical thinking must have its actualization, sensible or senseless. The luxury of the machine is the consequence of a necessity of thought. In last analysis, the machine is a symbol, like its secret ideal, perpetual motion, a spiritual and intellectual, but no vital necessity. It is beginning to contradict even economic practice in many ways. Already the divorce is being foreshadowed everywhere. The machine, by its multiplication and refinement, is in the end defeating its own purpose. In the great cities, the motor car has by its numbers destroyed its own value, and one gets on quicker on foot. In Argentine, Java, and elsewhere, the simple horse plow of the small cultivator has shown itself economically superior to the big motor implement, and is driving the latter out. Already in many tropical regions, the black or brown man with his primitive ways of working is a dangerous competitor to the modern plantation technique of the white, and the white worker in old Europe and North America is becoming uneasily inquisitive about his work. It is, of course, nonsense to talk, as it was fashionable to do in the 19th century, of the imminent exhaustion of the coal fields within a few centuries of the consequences thereof. Here, too, the materialistic age could not but think materially. Quite apart from the actual saving of coal by the substitution of petroleum and water power, technical thought would manage ere long to discover and open up still other and quite different sources of power. It is not worthwhile thinking ahead so far in time, for the West European American technics will itself have ended by then. No stupid trifle like the absence of material would be able to hold up this gigantic evolution, so long as the thought working inside it is on its heights. So long will it be able, without fail, to produce the means for its purposes. But how long will it stay on these heights? Even on the present scale, our technical processes and installations, if they are to be maintained, require, let us say, 100,000 outstanding brains, as organizers and discoverers and engineers. These must be strong, nay, even creative, talents, enthusiasts for their work, and formed for it by a stealing of years' duration at great expense. Actually, it is just this calling that has for the last 50 years irresistibly attracted the strongest and ablest of the white youth. Even the children play with technical things. In the urban classes and families whose sons chiefly come into consideration in this connection, there was already a tradition of comfort and culture, so that the normal preconditions were already provided for that mature and autumnal product, technical intellectuality. But all this is changing in the last decades. In all the countries where large-scale industry is of old standing, the Faustian thought begins to be sick of machines. A weariness is spreading, a sort of pacifism of the battle with nature. Men are returning to forms of life simpler and nearer to nature. They are spending their time in sport instead of technical experiments. The great cities are becoming hateful to them, and they would fain get away from the pressure of soulless facts and the clear, cold atmosphere of technical organization. And it is precisely the strong and creative talents that are turning away from practical problems and sciences and towards pure speculation. Occultism and spiritualism, Hindu philosophies, metaphysical inquisitiveness under Christian or pagan coloring, all of which were despised in the Darwinian period, are coming up again. It is the spirit of Rome in the age of Augustus. Out of satiety of life, man take refuge from civilization in the more primitive parts of the earth, in vagabondage, in suicide. The flight of the born leader from the machine is beginning. Every big entrepreneur has occasion to observe a falling off in the intellectual qualities of his recruits. But the grand technical development of the 19th century had been possible only because the intellectual level was constantly becoming higher. Even a stationary condition, short of an actual falling off, is dangerous and points to an ending, however numerous and however well-schooled may be the hands ready for work. And how is it with them? The tension between work of leadership and work of execution has reached the level of a catastrophe. The importance of the former, the economic value of every real personality in it, has become so great that it is invisible and incomprehensible to the majority of underlings. In the latter, the work of the hands, the individual is now entirely without significance. Only numbers matter. In the consciousness of this unalterable stage of things, aggravated, poisoned, and financially exploited by egoistic orators and journalists, men are so forlorn that it is mere human nature to revolt against the role for which the machine, not as they imagine its possessors, earmarks most of them. There is beginning in numberless forms, from sabotage by way of strike to suicide, the mutiny of the hands against their destiny, against the machine, against the organized life, against anything and everything. The organization of work, as it has existed for thousands of years, based on the idea of collective doing, and the consequent division of labor between leaders and led, heads and hands, is being disintegrated from below. But mass is no more than a negation, specifically a negation of the concept of organization, and not something viable in itself. An army without officers is only a superfluous and forlorn herd of men. A chaos of brickbats and scrap iron is a building no more. This mutiny, worldwide, threatens to put an end to the possibility of technical economic work. The leaders may take to flight, but the led become superfluous, are lost. The numbers are their death. The third and most serious symptom of the collapse that is beginning lies, however, in what I may call treason to technics. What I am referring to is known to everyone, but it has never been envisaged in its entirety, for consequently its fateful significance has never disclosed itself. The immense superiority that Western Europe and North America enjoyed in the second half of the 19th century in power of every kind, economic and political, military and financial, was based on an uncontested monopoly of industry. Great industries were only possible in connection with the coal fields of these northern countries. The role of the rest of the world was to absorb the product, and colonial policy was always, for practical purposes, directed to the opening up of new markets and new sources of raw material, not to the development of new areas of production. There was coal everywhere, of course, but only the white engineers would have known how to get at it. We were in sole possession not of the material, but of the methods and the trained intellects required for its utilization. It is this that constitutes the basis of the luxurious living of the white worker, whose income, in comparison with that of the native, is princely. A circumstance that Marxism has turned to dishonest account, to its own ruin. It is being revenged on us today, for from now on, evolution is going to be complicated by the problem of unemployment. The high level of wages of the white worker, which is today a peril to his very life, rests upon the monopoly that the leaders of industry have created about him. And then, at the close of the last century, the blind will to power began to make its decisive mistakes. Instead of keeping strictly to itself the technical knowledge that constituted their greatest assets, the white peoples complacently offered it to all the world. In every Hochschule, high school, German high school, verbally and on paper, on the astonished homage of Indians and Japanese delighted them. No, let's read that again. Instead of keeping strictly to itself the technical knowledge that constituted their greatest asset, the white peoples complacently offered it to all the world, in every Hochschule, verbally and on paper, and the astonished homage of Indians and Japanese delighted them. The famous dissemination of industry set in, motivated by the idea of getting bigger profits by bringing production into the marketing area. And so, in place of the export of finished products exclusively, they began an export of secrets, processes, methods, engineers, and organizers. Even the inventors emigrate. For socialism, which I could, if I liked Even the inventors emigrate. For socialism, which could, if it liked harness them in its team, expel them instead. And so, presently, the natives saw into our secrets, understood them, and used them to the full. Within 30 years, the Japanese became technicians of the first rank, and in their war against Russia, they revealed a technical superiority from which their teachers were able to learn many lessons. Today, more or less everywhere, in the Far East, India, South America, South Africa, industrial regions are being or coming into being, which, over to their low scales of wages, will face us with a deadly competition. The unassailable privileges of the white races have been thrown away, squandered, betrayed. The others have caught up with their instructors, possibly with their combination of native cunning and the overripe intelligence of their ancient civilizations. They have surpassed them. Where there is coal or oil or water power, there a new weapon can be forged against the heart of the Faustian civilization. The exploited world is beginning to take its revenge on its lords. The innumerable hands of the colored races, at least as clever and far less exigent, will shatter the economic organization of the whites at its foundations. The accustomed luxury of the white workman, in comparison with the coolie, will be his doom. The labor of the white is itself coming to be unwanted. The huge masses of men centered in northern coal areas, the great industrial works, the capital invested in them, whole cities and districts are faced with the probability of going under in the competition. The center of gravity of production is steadily shifting away from them, especially since even the respect of the colored races for the white has been ended by the World War. This is the real and final basis of the unemployment that prevails in the white countries. It is no mere crisis, but the beginning of a catastrophe. For these colored peoples, including in this context the Russians, the Faustian techniques are in no wise an inward necessity. It is only Faustian man that thinks, feels, and lives in this form. To him it is a spiritual need, not on account of its economic consequences, but on account of its victories. Navigare necesse est vivere non est necesse. I'm not going to try to translate that. For the colored races, on the contrary, it is but a weapon in their fight against the Faustian civilization. A weapon like a tree from the woods that one uses as a house, timber, but discards as soon as it has served its purpose. The machine techniques will end with the Faustian civilization, and one day will lie in fragments, forgotten. Our railways and steamships as dead as the Roman roads and the Chinese wall, our giant cities and skyscrapers in ruins like old Memphis and Babylon. The history of this technics is fast drawing to its inevitable close. It will be eaten up from within, like the grand forms of any and every culture. When, in what fashion, we do not know. Faced as we are with this destiny, there is only one world outlook that is worthy of us, that which has already been mentioned as the choice of Achilles. Better a short life full of deeds and glory than a long life without content. Already a danger is so great for every individual, every class, every people, that to cherish an illusion whatever is deplorable. Time does not suffer itself to be halted. There is no question of prudent retreat or wise renunciation. Only dreamers believe that there is a way out. Optimism is cowardice. We are born into this time and must bravely follow the path to the destined end. There is no other way. Our duty is to hold on to the lost position without hope, without rescue, like that Roman soldier whose bones were found in front of a door in Pompeii, who, during the eruption of Vesuvius, died at his post because they forgot to relieve him. That is greatness. That is what it means to be a thoroughbred. The honorable end is the one thing that cannot be taken from a man. And that concludes Man and Technics, a contribution to a philosophy of life, and my throat hurts bad. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see which audiobook I will do next and when. Maybe even next week, or maybe I wait until I get some feedback on this one, because there hasn't really been any yet. Yeah, and then we'll see how we go from here. But thanks for being with me again today, and goodbye.